Hello, everybody! I hope everyone can hear me okay. How's the audio quality tonight? I just got a new, what are they called? Pop filter. So hopefully I'm coming in loud and clear. It's great to be here tonight with you guys. I hope everyone is doing great tonight on this Friday. I hope everyone had a great Feast of the Assumption yesterday. Many parishes move it to Sunday, the Feast of the Assumption. Not the Feast of the Assumption, I apologize. The Ascension. The Feast of the Ascension of Christ into heaven. Very different than the Assumption. That one is with the Blessed Virgin Mary. The Feast of the Ascension was Thursday, the solemnity of that. But many parishes, they celebrate it on Sunday. The diocese I am in does that. But perhaps you guys did go to church. In any case, I hope everyone is doing well. It's great to see everybody. I did get a haircut. Thank you for noticing. I did, yeah, that's true. I want to first off plug the entropy link here because I always forget to do that. And then I also want to say that there may be tonight, and this is very exciting, there may be tonight an auction. I don't have a pen with me. I'll have to go and grab that. I'll have to take like a short intermission if it goes down. I'm not sure if we'll have it tonight or not, but if we do, it'll be very cool. But I have some books. When I was doing the waifu book tour, for those who support me on Patreon and Entropy link, or through the Entropy link, I did a special waifu book tour for them. And it's just called waifu. That's like the tag and the role they have in the Discord. And one of the things that they noticed was that I had a lot of duplicate books and some books that I really didn't want. And so they suggested that I auction them off, and I thought that was a good idea. So if we have enough people, sufficient a number of people who are interested in that, I'll be doing that later tonight. And I'll be signing them, and whoever gets the book, I'll write a special message just for them. As long as I have some idea who you are, and I know many of you, then I'll write something just very special, not like Ed Phaser. Ed Phaser signed my book by proofs of the existence of God, and he just like signed it and said like, have a good day or something really generic. I won't do that. Nothing generic, very specific, very meaningful, very heartfelt, because that's how I do it. So yeah, just look forward to that if it happens. So unreturned library books, no comment. There are a lot of unreturned library books on my bookshelf that I have no intention to give back at the moment. In any case, I think it's best if we just jump in to Theology Hour in the meantime. Otherwise, we might not get through everything today. I'm not sure how long exactly it'll take, but hopefully we'll get through everything. We're going through this book now. We're no longer going through the sacraments. Just reminds the people the Latin Mass explained here by Monsignor George J. Mormon. So, that is, we're going to kind of go chapter by chapter through that. Last week, I think we laid a good foundation for talking about the Latin Mass. We differentiated in kind of broad terms from the Novus Ordo Missae. And as we go through the rubrics, and as we go through the language that's spoken, and all these different things, just keep in mind, because I might not do it explicitly, just keep in mind the ways in which this is different from the English Mass, or the Mass in the vernacular that you see at probably most parishes throughout the West. So just keep those things in mind as we talk about tonight. Last week we also discussed the sacrificial nature of the Mass, the importance of it. We kind of talked about in many different venues, and why it's the most holy and august of all the sacraments, and why all the other sacraments are pointed to Holy Communion and the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. So continuing with that theme tonight, we're going to be talking about why is the Mass in Latin? I think this is a question that many of you may share. Certainly I did when I first approached it. Like, okay, I understand that the Novus Ordo didn't just change the Mass from Latin to English, but they also changed some rubrics and what have you. But like, why is it important to have it in Latin in the first place? Certainly in the East, they use a lot more vernacular in their liturgy. So, why is it something that the Church thought prudent or necessary to do? And so let's just jump into that. And then also tonight we'll be going into some of what is required in order to celebrate Mass properly, like the altar cards and things of that sort. I'll have some visuals, so hopefully we'll have a good night. So again, like I always say, if you have questions, that's awesome, that's great, but I may miss them. If you put them through the entropy link, I will definitely not miss them, but I'll probably read them at the end of the night, just so everyone is aware. All right. So to begin, it is important to note that it's not like immoral. It's not sinful to use like the vernacular in general for rites, insofar as like I mentioned, the East does use vernacular a lot more so than the West does, and they're not in sin. They've continued with that. That's the tradition they've had since the time of the apostles. However, for the West, it is the tradition to keep everything in Latin. It was originally in Hebrew, as I've talked about this I think last time, as Latin became the official language of Rome. Then the church adopted it as well, and there are good reasons for it. There are good reasons for it to be in Latin. There are almost no good reasons really for it to be in the vernacular. And to start, and I think this is probably the most important place to start, and I saw this, and I'm not like trying to dog on this guy, but I saw someone in the Discord, they said like, oh, next time in preparation for the next theology hour, people should read up on Latin, and they should study it, and they should know it. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing to know Latin, but I'm making it very clear right now that no, you don't need to know Latin. That is one of the great things about it, is that you're not supposed to know it, actually, for most people. And it's really, I think, necessary to remember that the Mass isn't just a prayer. I think a lot of people think it is, and certainly the priest is praying at the altar. This is the highest prayer that there is, as Pope Pius X says. But it's in a more and greater sense, it is an act. It is a work that the priest is doing at the altar. And while it is not necessary that people join with the priest in prayer, you can if you want through the missal, though it can be distracting, and oftentimes you may be confused, and that's why I always recommend people not to do that the first time they attend to a Latin Mass. But even if you're really good at using the missal, and I don't want to be bragocious or anything, but I'm pretty good at it. I've been using it for a while, so I know where the propers are and the canons are and what have you. But there's still even times when the choir might be singing something that I don't recognize, or they do like some litany I don't recognize, and so I don't know the words that they're saying. And that's okay. It's not necessary that I be able to follow along with every prayer the priest says. However, it is necessary, if you want to receive the benefits and graces that come from attending Holy Mass, that you join with the priest in the work that he is performing at the altar. And that, of course, is the Holy Sacrifice, when we can join our intentions with that of the priest, and we offer the sacrifice to God with the fourfold intentions of adoration, thanksgiving, petition, and asking God for forgiveness. If we do those are the fourfold intentions that we offer the Holy Sacrifice, the Mass for. And if you do that, there are certain graces that come with it, and there's the Mass is one of the most copious and beneficial ways to alleviate the temporal punishment for sins. It is most freely distributed by assisting at the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. And the more that we consciously and devoutly assist at Mass, the more we try to unite ourselves with that of the priest being the principal priest offering the sacrifice, but we are lesser, in a sense, lesser priests, since we offer up our own sacrifice, but we can join it with that. The priest, we receive certain graces and benefits from that. And a great example that the book brings up is in the Old Testament. There was a part of their liturgy, part of their rite, was the priest would enter, I think it's only was once a year, into the Holy of Holies. And they used to tie a string, I believe, around his leg or around his waist, in case that he were to mess up, God would just strike him dead. I guess they had a history of messing up. And so they would have to, since no one else could enter into the Holy of Holies except for like the high priest, and he had to make sure to abstain from certain sexual activities. He had to wash himself daily. There's a great deal of rigor that went into this. And so if they didn't properly prepare themselves, because this was the Holy of Holies where the Ark of the Covenant was, if they profane this, then they would be struck down, and so then no one else can enter, obviously, so they just have to like drag him out. Well, obviously, while this practice is going on, the Israelite people who are outside the temple, or in there's like various layers of the temple, if I remember correctly, they're obviously not able to see the prayers the priest is saying. However, they're still able to unite with the priest, knowing that he is offering a sacrifice to God on their behalf, knowing that he is offering a sacrifice to God on their behalf for the forgiveness of their sins and for the other intentions that I just mentioned. And for that reason, they're able to receive the benefits of it. In the New Testament now we have like the real thing. The sacrifices back then were more symbolic. They never accomplished what they basically pointed to, whereas our sacraments do, because they didn't have Christ. The only kind of sacrifice that could be pleasing to God is Christ. That is why Christ had to offer himself for us on the cross, which is what we celebrate on Good Friday. And then, of course, it is only through Christ and then the holy sacrifice of the Mass who becomes for us bread and wine. Under the species of bread and wine, there is Christ truly, actually, and substantially there to be offered to God. And this is the clean oblation that is the same sacrifice to sacrifice the Mass, as I mentioned earlier in previous streams, but this time this is like the clean addition, the clean presentation of that sacrifice. And that for that reason, it's even more important, I think, for us to be careful, especially if you're a priest. Nowadays, it seems that God doesn't strike down priests, though maybe it wouldn't hurt to strike down priests who do profane the sacrament. But certainly with the laity, we've seen a lot of profanation of the sacrament. Just look up communion in the hand and liturgical abuses. They're pretty rampant right now, unfortunately. And if you look at like the rigor and how careful they were in the Old Testament, and even how careful they were throughout the history of the church, and you look at what's happening now, it's very scandalous. It's very scandalous once you realize how careful the priest was in dealing with the Holy Eucharist, how careful they were in making sure that when the priest split the host in half, he ran his finger along the edge to make sure there was no crumbs that could fall off at any moment that were haphazardly situated there, because even the smallest molecule of the bread contained the body of Christ. All right, so what else though? Why else should we choose Latin besides the fact that it is not necessary for us to know exactly what the priest is saying, but we have to follow along with the act he's performing? Why else though might be Latin useful or important to use as the language of the church and the language of the liturgy? And another good reason is it's a mysterious language. It's spoken by, I think, very, very few people. And surprisingly, I think some people in our Discord who know Latin pretty well, very impressed by them. But most people don't know Latin, especially ecclesiastical Latin, which differs from the vulgar kind of Latin they might teach you in certain classical educational programs. So its use conveys the message that what's happening at the altar is beyond the ordinary listener's comprehension. The sacrifice of the Mass is just as mysterious as Latin itself. That's kind of the tone it sets. By using this mysterious language, it sets the tone that what's happening is a mystery, and that is why at the consecration of the wine as it becomes the blood of Christ, the priest says Mysterium Fidei, the mystery of faith, at the very end there, because this is a mystery that relates to our faith on how this bread becomes for us the body and blood, soul and divinity of Christ. And this is something that I would say is not unique to Catholicism, this impulse. And Shinto, and I'm about to actually read for you a passage here from this book I was reading, Shinto the Kami Way, and I enjoy reading about other religions, not because I in any way intend to convert to them, but more because the similarities, especially with Catholicism over perhaps Protestantism, reinforce in my mind that Catholicism is a religion that speaks to our very nature as human beings, and it helps to grow my own faith. And perhaps that will be the same too once I read this quote, because it's very interesting why in the Shinto rituals they use the older form of Japanese instead of the one they currently speak today. And this is also true for the Greek Orthodox. They'll often use the Koine Greek instead of whatever the modern version is today. If you look at the ancient Israelites, they use the ancient form of Hebrew in their liturgy and their rites, and it's all for the very similar reasons. It keeps the liturgy sacred and inaccessible to the common vulgar masses. And that's what makes, that's what is precious, that which is, excuse me, that which like we find to be precious or valuable, we should try to make it scarce. For example, like a woman's hair is one of her most valuable features, it's one of the most feminine features, and that is why it's important for women to, and they should see this as not like a bad thing, but this is a good thing to veil when they're in mass, veil when they're in church, because that's one of their most sacred features of them, and that which we find to be sacred, we want to make it scarce. My mom has several like wedding rings that she's gotten from deceased family members, and the ones she most values, she puts away in like a box, and she will only bring them out for special occasions. And why is that? Because again, those things that we value the most, we want to keep them inaccessible, we want to make them scarce, that more something that is available to people, just some supply and demand from basic economics, the more that its value goes down, the more that we know that its worth is diminished. And for that reason, it's good to keep the mass mysterious and inaccessible to your average man, so that way we can keep the value retained, and that we can keep it veiled in a certain sense. And this is all goes back to the idea of the discipline of the secret we talked about last time, the esoteric part of the early church, the very initiatic. They were very secretive about their liturgies and rites. They wanted to protect it at all costs. And this is like comes from what Christ said: do not throw your pearls before swine. They are very careful and very secretive, and that is why today the canon of the Mass is said entirely silently, lest it fall on unholy ears. So let me read here this quote. I think this is really interesting. And so like I'm saying, basically, that the need to have a mysterious language is not unique to Catholicism, but this is like a perennial impulse that is primordial, you could say. And it is something, of course, that we don't see in other, like Protestantism and in the New Mass. And so that kind of reflects, in a certain sense, that this is not a liturgy that is adapted to the natural state of man. Let's see here. All right. Prayers. And this is, again, from this book on Shinto here. The ceremonial prayers that are read, or rather recited at shrines by the priest, are in classical Japanese, which was not intelligible when it was the prevailing language, but is not understood today by people unless they have made a study of the subject, which, again, is very similar to Latin. In ancient times, a great many historical and other important records were written in beautiful, rhythmic poems in order to facilitate their transmission to posterity. Prayers were also composed in this style in order that the mystic feeling embodied in the manner of addressing the kami, which had been inherited from great antiquity, might be transmitted intact to future generations. And that's just a great quote right there. The mystic feeling that's embodied in the manner of addressing the kami, which is loosely translated to God. It's like a manifestation of principle or spirit. It's kind of like the anthropomorphized, like kind of spirit or something of that sort. But the mystic way in which they addressed it, they wanted it to be transmitted. They wanted it to be retained. In other words, they wanted it to keep from being corrupted. And we'll get to kind of that aspect of Latin as well. That is another one of the benefits of Latin. But there we also see the fact as this mystic manner in which they address the kame. And again, it's like there's something about antique languages which are mystical. This was especially necessary because the new short and to Japanese ears somewhat harsh Chinese words without melody, which had been introduced from the mainland, had modified the Japanese language and were not deemed suitable to preserve the meaning and spirit of the ancient ceremonies. And see, here we see an evolution of a rite, or evolution rather of language. We see evolution of language, and Japanese, they began to introduce Chinese phrases and words, and anyone who's heard Japanese can easily differentiate it from Chinese based on the way it sounds. The Chinese sound like they're like a dog barking at a tree, and very harsh and short, as the book says, whereas Japanese, I think, is a little more, it flows more nicely, it's more elegant, which was why I prefer it as a language, like trying to learn it, that is to say. And for that reason, in order to safeguard liturgy as being poetic, to being beautiful, they wanted to keep it in the antique language. And again, we'll get into kind of why Latin does something very similar, and why Latin holds up, again, because of the evolution of languages. It's very important to have it in a dead language. There is something special about dead languages, which are unsusceptible to changes in meaning and tone, which are good to have for certain ceremonies and rites in which you want the meaning that they represented in the past to be passed down in continuity and perpetuity, both in continuity with the past and then in perpetuity with the future generations. You want the meaning to be retained at all costs. As we talked about last time, lex orandi est lex credendi. The law of prayer is the law of belief. The contained within the prayers we pray is the belief, is the dogma of the church. And that is why we want to make sure the meaning is not distorted by changes in language. And so Latin is a venerable language. The book says Latin is a venerable language due to its history in the church. As we can look, it's very antique in that sense. It's also very poetic. It's one of the romantic languages, so it exalts the listener's ears. It assists in creating, I think, and I think anyone who's heard Latin chants agrees with me here, it creates this sublime atmosphere where our consciousness is going to be lifted, it's going to be elevated from like the mundane material realm to the transcendental plane. It's also very philosophical language. I think it's said by Father Gregory Hess, that any philosophical concept can be most perfectly expressed in Latin. This is why Spinoza wrote all in Latin. Kant himself can't help but to write in Latin in certain times and phrases. Leibniz is the same way. For example, Kant often refers to God as the ens realissimum, which means the most real being, a being which has all realities attached to it. Well, it'd be quite the mouthful to say all that, and so he uses the Latin word ens realissimum, which means the exact same thing. So there's a lot of significance there in its poetic usage. Latin also fosters unity within the church. The use of the Latin language is able to unite the various Western nations under the common ecclesiastical tongue, and reminds us that the church is truly Catholic. We saw the Catholic Church, but sometimes people lose sight of what the word Catholic means. It means universal, and it means it's universal in her mission and her operation to convert all the nations of the world, all the peoples of the world. And for that reason, the church wants to unite everyone around a common language and liturgy and creed. And so that is why the use of the Latin language is kind of you're able to share in this solidarity with all the Christians, at least in the West. And it makes sense to use Latin, as Rome used to be the center of the world. It was said that Rome was a city that was the center of the world back when the Roman Empire was still around. All the various European tribal groups, Nords, Germanic people, what have you, they were all under the authority of Rome, and for that reason, the Latin language was a language that they all understood to be the tongue of the continent, basically. And so I think that's important to retain that. There's a great quote here by Pope Pius the 11th, and Officiorum Omnium. It says here, for the church, precisely because it embraces all nations and is destined to endure until the end of time, of its very nature requires a language that is universal, immutable, and non-vernacular. So here we see the Pope Pius XI very strongly telling people, exhorting the church that the use of the Latin language is very important, and both her sacred functions, as well as to use Latin for all its papal bulls and encyclicals, they all should be in Latin as well, again, to safeguard and to unite the church. And like I kind of hinted at earlier, Latin safeguards the truth because it is not because it is a dead language. It's not subject to change and evolution. The most obvious example that comes to mind, I'm sure you guys can think of many, is like the word gay. And the word gay, if you use that now, is going to have a very different connotation and meaning than the way that Shakespeare probably used it in his plays and in his writings. And however, we don't want the dogma of the church to be subject to different change and revision. Rather, we want to use something that's like a dead language, because we know that the dogma of the church is immutable, it is fixed, and so we want a language that is similar, like a Latin, which is dead, so therefore immutable, it's fixed, it will never change, and rather it's just the translation. You might have to update that every now and then. But the documents themselves should be in Latin so that they can retain the same precision and the same meaning that they did in the past today. And this is a great way for the documents to be resilient against heresies and heretics who'd love to twist the meaning, who believe in some evolution of dogma, that the church is simply, this is what Pope Pius X talks about when he condemns modernism. He says it's the synthesis of all heresies. And he says this is because modernism wants to evolve dogma. It doesn't see the church as this foundation or this physical body, but rather some collective consciousness. And just as collective consciousness change with language, our collective consciousness is like a society, we often change language and its meaning, so too can we change dogma. That is why it's very important to remind people that no, the church is not a collective consciousness. That is why we don't use the vernacular language, neither in our liturgy nor in our papal encyclicals. And why not the liturgy? Again, lex orandi, as lex credendi, the law of prayer is the law of belief. Our beliefs are contained in our prayers. And here's another great quote from Pope Pius XII, rather. He says here in Mediator Dei, the use of Latin language prevailing in a great part of the church affords at once an imposing sign of unity and an effective safeguard against the corruptions of true doctrine. Alright, so to conclude here, we can see that the use of the Latin in the liturgy, the use of Latin just throughout the church in general, but especially the liturgy, has great import. And that is why, when you go to Mass, think about these things. If you attend a Novus Ordo Mass, or just think about the fact that they're not using Latin and what they're missing out on and how they can easily twist words. And we've seen this, in fact, in the Novus Ordo Missae. For example, in the words of consecration, it says, this is my body which has been given up for you. Do this in memory of me. And then they do the blood. And it says, this will be shed for you and for many unto the forgiveness of sins. The word in Latin clearly means many. But the Novus Ordo folks, some of them would like to say, no, it means actually for all. That's implicit there. And so they changed the meaning to all. And you might say, well, didn't Jesus die for all people? Well, yeah, sure, he intended that for the salvation of everyone, insofar as he'd like everyone to be saved, but he realizes that not everyone will be, and so the sacrifice of the Mass is only efficacious, and it's only propitious towards those people who already are saved and in this state of grace, which is going to be the many, not all. I think the French, and that was in America, some bishops made that the translation in English. I think in France they made it the multitude, and these inconsistencies bring into question whether or not the Mass itself is valid. If you're changing the words of consecration and changing its meaning, then you really do bring into question the validity of the sacrament, and this is a huge deal. Now, thankfully, Pope Benedict XVI, I think he kind of squashed this. He regularized it to make sure that the English matched more accurately the Latin, but if people just use the Latin, this wouldn't have been a problem in the first place. So you can see now why heretics and those who want to see the destruction and the downfall of the church will love to see it lose its universal language. Oh, and one more point I forgot to bring up is that Satan hates Latin. I was watching, actually, this wasn't mentioned in the book, so I guess I didn't write it down for that reason, but I was actually watching this interview with, who was it? Father Lamport, I think. He's an exorcist. He was on Matt Frudd's show. Probably the second, maybe. He's, me and him, we're very comparable in our content. We both talk about theology. He might have some nicer equipment and maybe a little bigger budget, and he has better guests on. But hey, I think we're kind of comparable in terms of, our content, how rich it is. I'd like to see myself on his level. That's a joke, but he's a great guy. Definitely check him out if you haven't heard of Matt Frudd. He does Pints with Aquinas, but he had a Father Vincent Lamport, I think was his name on. And Father Vincent Lamport said that Satan hates Latin because it is the language of the church, both historically and even today. It still is the language of the church. And for that reason, when they're doing exorcisms, when a priest speaks Latin, it's much more efficacious, and the demon is more likely to manifest itself in someone, and thereby makes it easier to rout the demon out. Which is something interesting to think about. The fact that if Satan hates Latin, that maybe we should make that, maybe we should bring that back, considering how satanic and evil and degenerate our world and society is becoming. Just look at that one rapper who was what was he doing, grinding on Satan? I didn't watch it. He did this Nike shoes with 666, really evil, demonic stuff, perverted things. This reveling in evil that we see nowadays with the rise of witchcraft and all sorts of these very bizarre and evil, that's the only way you could really put this, evil, wicked practices that are opening up, people are opening themselves up to the demonic realm. What is the best way to fight this? Well, for one, maybe we should start implementing a language in the liturgy which Satan hates, which pushes back against Satan and forces him out of the church, forces him out. There's this the Pope Leo XIII, I think he was saying Mass, and he had this vision, and the vision of Satan entering into I think he says some fissure or crack into the temple of God. And he's warned in this prophetic warning that in 100 years, Satan will be able to bring great calamity to the church. The church will enter into her passion. And that is why he institutes at the end of the low mass, the prayer St. Michael. St. Michael's prayer, I think many of you know it. It's the one that says, defend us in battle, be a protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil, so on and so forth. It's a great prayer to pray whenever you feel tempted to commit sin, and if you feel like you're under demonic oppression or obsession. It's a great one to recite and to know. And so that is why it was placed at the end of the low mass, was because of that reason, because of that vision Pope Leo XIII had. Unsurprisingly, 100 years later, this was in 1860 something, 1861, 1863, something like that. Vatican II happened in 1961 to 1965. We saw the Second Vatican Council 100 years later, the Second Vatican Council. Since then, the church has been in her passion. That is the only way you can make sense of the situation that is unfolded, the calamity that the church is facing right now. And so, yes, it's very important, and I bring this up because it's showing that part of the way that Pope Leo XIII wanted to expel Satan from the church was by adding this prayer. Well, another great way that we can do so is by bringing Latin back. Satan hates Latin. So as you can see, yes, Latin has great import. There's good reasons to have it. There's not really good reasons to have it in the vernacular, except people say, oh, well, maybe it's more intelligible. It doesn't have to be more intelligible. In fact, this oftentimes shouldn't be, because like I said, things that are scarce, things that are veiled are going to be more valuable. They're less likely to be tainted by the vulgar masses. Once they get a hold of them, they may misunderstand them or misconstrue them. So it's better for them just to follow the act that is happening at the Mass. It unites the church, it safeguards dogma, and that's all. It's like external usefulness, and then its internal usefulness is that it is a poetic language, a mystical language, and is an inaccessible language capable of mystifying and sanctifying our sacred rites. And so it is not without grave reason that Pope Pius X, I would say he prophetically and infamously said, quote here, and this is a great quote, the day the church abandons her universal tongue, Latin, is the day before she returns to the catacombs. Let that sink in. The day before she abandons her universal tongue is the day before she returns to the catacombs. Where are we now? Where is the true church? The true church is not found in the heretics. So if you've ever been to Novus Ordo and they teach heresy, that true church is not found there. Where is it found? Well, at one time, it was only found in very discrete locations. After the Second Vatican Council, the Latin Mass was under intense persecution, and so you could only find traditional priests in like hotels. They would say Mass at hotels. They would say Mass wherever they could find a place to say it, at people's homes. I've been to like one time they had a Latin Mass conference at a hotel, and they had an altar there, and they had everything set up in this conference room, and it was very reminiscent of like a catacomb. They went into hiding almost in fear of the ecclesiastical authorities who were bowing down against them. Now, thankfully, with Summorum Pontificum, Benedict XVI's very famous papal encyclical, we have since a lot of these pressures have been alleviated, and we see a lot more orthodoxy within the church that is at least free to practice, even though in some places it is still under intense persecution. Pope Francis, I think he shut down some group of friars or Franciscans who were saying the Latin Mass. I don't know if anyone heard about this. It was some order. It's like the Order of the Knights of Malta. It was like something like similar, and they were doing the Latin Mass, and Pope Francis shut them down. So things of this sort, they'll definitely go after them. So where is the true church? The true church is found where you have the true sacraments, and you have orthodoxy. You have a priest that recognizes the Pope and that teaches the true dogmas of the church. That is where the true church is to be found. That is where the visible church is to be found. And that today is becoming, I think, it's harder and harder to find with some priests and parishes. It really depends where you go. I'm not going to pretend that all Novus Ordo priests are corrupted and heretics. I'm not saying that. Okay, let me make that clear. But a lot of them have liturgical abuses. A lot of them are obviously using the vernacular, and for that reason it's easier to become corrupted and distorted, especially with the laity. And we see today that even if these parishes are producing valid sacraments, they're clearly ineffective at administering to the needs, the spiritual needs of their parishes. We talked about last time the complete the loss of faith. The loss of faith we see within Catholics. Only I think 1/3 believe in the true presence of Christ. 3% think contraception is wrong. Now compare that to the people who attend Latin Mass regularly. If you compare it to the people who attend it, or some other traditional service like a Byzantine liturgy or a Melkite liturgy or something like that, some Eastern liturgy which is in communion with Rome, if you compare the attendees, almost 99% of them believe in the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist. 99% of them understand the teaching of the church on contraception, abortion, same-sex marriage, all these things which the culture wants to push and to inundate the corruption of these ideas, perverse messages about marriage, perverse messages about quote-unquote woman's autonomy and what have you. So very prophetic words. Pope Pius XII understood the importance of Latin, that it would safeguard dogma, it would keep evolution of dogma from ever occurring, and he understood that the laity would lose the faith if they abandoned it. And what do we see today? So just something to think about. Oh man, are we already almost out of time? Wow. Okay. All right. So I wanted to wrap this part up by talking about the Council of Trent, Session 22, Canon 9. It declares, quote, "If anyone says that the rite of the Roman Church, according to which a part of the canon and the words of consecration are pronounced in a low tone, is to be condemned," that is to say, when the Mass is said in a quiet tone, the priest whispers, during the canon of the Mass, the priest says it quietly. If they say, which is obviously changed in the new Mass, everything is said pretty much vocally. If someone says that ought to be condemned, or that the Mass ought to be celebrated in the vernacular tongue only, or that water ought not to be mixed with the wine that is to be offered in the chalice because it is contrary to the institution of Christ, let him be anathema. Very strong words. Let him be anathema. If anyone condemns, basically, if anyone says that the Mass ought to be celebrated in the vernacular tongue only, let him be anathema. Very strong words. The Church had very strong words in the past to say about people wanting to change the language to the vernacular. So I'm not saying that they are anti-popes, the people like Pope Paul VI. I'm not in authority to say anything of that sort. I'm not an individualist. I'm not a Protestant, so I would never say that. It's just to show that the Church had very strong words to say. Whether or not these popes were anathema, I will have to let subsequent popes and councils decide. It's not something for me to determine whatsoever, or for me to pass judgment. The Pope is judged by no one. That is all I bring it up is just to show that the Church is very serious about these things. I guess we have enough time now to get started on the next subject. The next chapter is on the things necessary for the celebration of the Holy Sacrifice, the Mass. So let's just get started with that. We'll see how long you guys are like, your attention span lasts for, and we'll see how much we can get through. All right, so transitioning now away from new Mass versus old Mass, though I guess everything kind of goes back to that. That's going to be a recurring theme. But now, what is necessary to celebrate Mass? Even the people in the Novus Ordo have some of these things. And the most important, I guess the most important requirement is Christ, but after that, probably the altar is obviously one of the most important requirements. It's going to be one of the most popular pieces of furniture you see in any Catholic church, without which there can be no sacrifice. And so here's a picture here of a high altar. Let me show it. No, that's not a picture of a high altar. Where is my picture? Here it is. It's an old-fashioned high altar. Let me just minimize myself there. Okay. Now you see a high altar, and I was building in Minecraft a Catholic church, and I was trying to build an altar similar to this one here. But a lot of the people who are Catholics who attend Novus Ordo parishes, they didn't recognize an altar like this because all their altars had been stripped of its beauty, stripped of its elegance, stripped of its authenticity and its magnanimity. Really, this is a beautiful altar, and instead they're replaced by some ugly looking table, and the priest faces the people, and it's disgusting. This is the way altars used to look. The priest had to climb at least 3 stairs. There had to be 3 stairs. I think it represents the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Understand, right? And the altar is always elevated, and that's a practical reason. There's a practical reason for that. The practical purpose is just so people can see what's happening at the altar, even people who sit in the back. But there's also a lot of spiritual significance to it, a lot of spiritual symbolism. It should also be noted that there are side altars in every parish, so it's not just like this is just like a high altar. As you can see, it's very ornate. There may be side altars as well. It is the high altar though that is usually elevated. It's in like the very back of the nave, the apse. I kind of forget my terminology here. No, the choir. It's in the back of the choir. The choir is basically the left and the right of this of the size of the altar, so it'd be the back of the choir. All right. And so one of the reasons why it's elevated is because it reminds people of the journey Christ had to make to Mount Calvary. At the beginning of Mass, the priest starts at the very foot of the altar, and he says certain prayers, and he says, "I go unto the altar of God." And the altar server responds in Latin, "To God who giveth joy to my youth." And so he goes unto the altar of God, just like Moses went up to Mount Sinai, just as Christ went up to Mount Calvary to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. It helps to remind us that we must elevate our minds from the earthly, ephemeral considerations to the heavenly, anagogical ones. That's another reason it's elevated, to elevate our minds, elevate our disposition, which is necessary if we want to worship God in spirit and in truth. Fourth, it outlines, and this is so beautiful. I love the way the book said this here. It outlines the mediation between heaven and earth, the merging of the two realms. Through Christ, he's the principal mediator, the priest being the secondary mediator. Christ, of course, is the one who's performing the sacrifice. The priest is just the visual representation of Christ. Really is Christ doing the sacrifice, but the priest is the one who's acting in Christ's place on here on earth for us humans who see things that are material. We can't see Christ doing it, so the priest is standing in his place, the alter Christus. But that is why these altars were made to be so ornate and to look kind of like a kingdom. This is supposed to look like the gates of heaven, basically. It's supposed to be very and then there's usually supposed to be some picture behind the altar. Let me see if I can find a better one here that represented kind of the heaven opening up. Heaven opening up. There's some really beautiful ones I've seen in the past, but often this kind of represents the gates of heaven. And it's basically showing that the priest stands between earth here, the earthly realm, like down here with the people, and then here's the gates of heaven here. That is why it's like so ornate with all these various spires. And then they usually have some picture in the background that represents heaven, usually with clouds and angels and saints in it, to represent that this is the merging between heaven and earth. The priest stands between heaven and earth to do mediation between us, to do mediation between God and man. The priest stands there. Here's a great picture, but it's why does it say it's a stock photo? That's sad. See if I can find a better one. Whatever. So here's another picture here. You can kind of see that that picture with the altar. What did I just do? I zoomed in, but maybe I should have done that. Okay, let's go. Oh, man. Here's a great one. Here's a great one. So here behind the altar is this picture of heaven. They really like these pictures of heaven because it represents, again, this is a great altar piece that represents the merging of heaven and earth. This is something that's going on is transcendent. And I think that's a great visual. That's a great visual to have, and something that we I think lack now with a lot of the modern churches. They're not as ornate and beautiful, unfortunately. And then finally, and so that is why saints have said that the closest you'll get to heaven on earth is by attending the holy sacrifice of the Mass, because that is when heaven and earth merge. That is the closest that we have to the metaphysical and the physical. That is the closest we'll ever get to that, until we die and receive the beatific vision, obviously. The altar also, of course, represents the table the Lord used at the Last Supper. That should be kind of obvious. It also represents, of course, the cross that Christ was crucified on in the bloody form. This is obviously the clean presentation. And then finally, it represents Christ. The altar represents Christ. And as the book so aptly put it, for nothing can be offered acceptably to God except by and through Christ. So even the altar represents Christ. The altar should be made of stone. Excuse me. Excuse me, that was a very unattractive noise. The altar should be made of stone. If it is to be made of wood, then there should be what's called an altar stone. That is to say, the part of the altar which has the chalice and the paten. The paten is contains under it, or on top of it rather, the sacred host. Anything that is to be consecrated should be on top of stone. And the bishop must consecrate the stone with holy unction, as well as there must be a relic, a first-class relic of a saint, contained therein within the stone. I don't think the Novus Ordo has these rubrics anymore. I think the rubrics still stand for the Latin Mass, but I'm not sure if I don't think the Novus Ordo have that rubric about there has to be the relics of a saint in the altar stone. And it calls to mind that Christ is the cornerstone of the church. There's lots of great scriptural passages about that. It reminds us of when Moses, he struck the rock with his rod, and water burst forth, and representing, of course, symbolizing that when Christ is crucified, he being the rock of the church, on which his grace would be copiously flow from it. So it reminds us of that imagery there, divine grace being copiously flowing out from that. And the anointing of the altar stone that the bishop has to do to consecrate it is to denote Christ being anointed with divinity. And then finally, the relics of the saint being contained therein reminds the church of the ancient practice. Back when the church was heavily persecuted, they used to celebrate Mass in catacombs. They would celebrate it over the tomb of someone who had died, and that is why altars today often kind of look almost like tombs. They're kind of rectangle shaped for that reason. Some other features you may notice here, and I'm running out of time here. All right, quick poll. Do you guys want to continue with this? May take another 15 minutes, or do you want to save it for next time? How are we doing, guys? How are my viewers doing? I just don't want to make people too bored and make it go too long, you know? So, okay, people are talking about what drinks they're getting. I think people are losing their attention. That's okay. People, after an hour, people get, okay, people want more. Okay. We can always wait till next time to talk about it, but I'll finish the altar. We'll do next time. Do a sneak peek. We'll talk about this one next time. This one we'll talk about next time, but I'll finish up on all the parts of the altar here. So the next thing to look at, let me see, can I zoom in? Yes, here we go. Okay. So here we go. Okay. Is the tabernacle. The tabernacle here is in the middle. This is the altar step here, crowned by the candles on either side. This here in the middle is the tabernacle. They still have these in most churches. I think you have to have them in order to, for all the churches that are considered Catholic, must have a tabernacle. However, a lot of the Novus Ordo churches have moved the tabernacle to the side, and I have no idea why they do that. I cannot figure out for the life of me, why would they move the tabernacle away from the altar? That sounds like retarded. I'm sorry, just put it plainly. Maybe does anyone know why they would do that? And besides making it less obvious that this is Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity contained in here. Usually the tabernacle contains just that. That is why they have, let me just zoom out again. That is why they have here a lamp that always burns red. There's a red candle. It always burns, and that's to signify that Christ is present here in the tabernacle. And so when they distribute Holy Communion, they usually get the communion that's contained in the tabernacle. Sometimes they'll consecrate it fresh, but usually they just get it from the tabernacle. Obviously, the tabernacle comes from the Old Testament. It was referring to the tent that contained the Ark of the Covenant. And there's a great verse here from Apocalypse or Revelations, as it's sometimes called, 21:3. Behold the tabernacle of God with men, and he will dwell with them. And so in the Old Testament, they had the Ark of the Covenant, and that was obviously represented that God was with the people of Israel. He was contained therein. He wasn't contained therein. It was all symbolic. It was all symbolism. However, in the New Testament, the New Covenant, now we actually do have Christ contained for us in the tabernacle. God truly is and substantially is with us here. in the tabernacle. That is why when people enter a church, they genuflect towards the tabernacle. That is why they show reverence by genuflecting towards the tabernacle. And why it's stupid and retarded to move it, because then people don't know where to genuflect to. People don't even genuflect these days. They just bow or something less reverent like that. And so I honestly don't understand why they would move the tabernacle. It just makes sense that while the priest is performing the sacrifice, the mass, that you would have the tabernacle there. Just as like the priests in the Old Testament would go into the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies, to perform their yearly sacrifice. So I'm not sure why they moved it. I think that was awful, and that's probably why we see such a loss of faith in the true presence. People are like, what is this box doing here on the side of the church, and why is it like some stool here, or what kneeler? Why is there some kneeler here next to it? Like, it's just a box. People don't understand its meaning, but when it's clearly here at the altar, it makes a lot more sense. You're like, oh, okay, that's where that which is done, that which is contained, which we saw at the mass, that which is contained, that is to save Christ's body and blood, is in this compartment, in this box here. There must be a crucifix on top of the altar. This reminds the faithful, of course, that Christ triumphed over sin through his crucifixion. All the infinite merit was earned for us on the cross through Christ's infinite obedience to God, and that it is through the application of that merit at the sacrifice of the Mass that we have absolution of venial sin and the remittance of our temporal punishment. That is something that occurs at the Mass through basically applying the merits of the cross, and so it draws our hearts and our attention to the cross, reminds us that this is the representation of this is the clean version, the clean presentation of the bloody sacrifice that happened here on the cross. And if you don't have a crucifix, this is a liturgical abuse. I have been in Novus Ordo parishes that do not have the crucifix near the altar. It must be visible for the laity to see. It cannot be small. It must be hidden. It must be large. It must be visible. And I would just leave immediately if I was you and you saw something like that. I would not attend a place like that, because clearly they are not following the rubrics of the church. They're disregarding, of course, the most important symbols of the Mass. That is very, it's an important feature. And so if they neglect to have something like that, then clearly their hearts and their minds are not, I think, in the right place. So I would not attend, if I was you, a place that did not have a crucifix. And like, they are in error, they are in sin, perhaps just material. They might be ignorant of this. The fact that they must have a crucifix, this is part of even the new rite, from what I understand. This is a liturgical abuse not to have a crucifix there. It's obvious, I think, why it must be there. There must be candles on either side of the altar. For a low mass, you just need 2 lit candles. For a missa cantata, you need 4. For a solemn high mass or a sung high mass, you need 6. Take the crown, the altar here. And this dates back before the 10th century. Acolytes used to carry candles in, and they'd place the candles on the floor on either side of the altar. They still do that today in the Eastern Church. They use those candles. They do that today in the Catholic Church too. They have the candles, but they're not the ones that are used at the altar. Rather, they're like put on the sides. But in the Eastern Church, they still use those candles, the ones that the acolytes bring in. And the candles must be 51% beeswax. Beeswax is pure wax that is made from bees. By bees, not from bees. By bees, made from, I think, flowers. Yeah, it's made from flowers. And it represents the pure flesh of Christ. It's pure beeswax. It represents like this pure wax. Just as Christ he received pure humanity from his Virgin Mother. He received pure humanity from his Virgin Mother. So without original sin, from his Virgin Mother. And so the candles also symbolize the fact that Jesus is the light of the world. The wick symbolizes his divinity. When it's lit, it symbolizes his soul. And it also reminds us that Christ inflames our hearts to love with love and charity and compassion. And then in the early church, they were used for a very practical purpose of just illuminating the altar. The Mass was said in catacombs, again, out of fear of persecution, and so everything was done secretly and in hiding, and so they were done They needed candles to light they didn't have lights, obviously, so they needed some candles or something like that to illuminate the altar. There are 3 linens, there are 3 altar cloths that go on top of the altar. All 3 of them must be white to represent Christ's purity. They must represent cleanliness, and just as the offering made here on the altar is clean, it is a clean sacrifice, and this is the clean version of the clean presentation of the bloody sacrifice that happened on Calvary. This is the clean version, and so that is why the altar cloths must be white. There's 3 to represent the 3 persons of the Trinity, and also the practical purpose. We notice there's always a practical and a spiritual symbolism here, or there's a practical purpose and a spiritual symbolism that goes along with it for a lot of these things. Nothing is done superfluously, nothing is done in vain when it comes to the holy sacrifice of the Mass. In case the priest, through the species of wine, were to spill the precious blood of our Lord, then it would be caught by the altar cloth instead of just spilling on the altar and then probably going everywhere, and that would of course be very irreverent and very sacrilegious, and for that reason we have the altar cloth there to catch it. So again, it represents Christ's purity, cleanliness, and again represents the clean sacrifice. There's a great verse again from Apocalypse 19:8. It says here, "For the fine linen are the justifications of saints." Fine linen is often represented in the Bible as purity, holiness. On the altar, when the Mass is said, there'll be 3 altar cards. Obviously, right now there's not. But when they begin to say the Mass, they'll have 3 altar cards here. 1, and this is important. If you're not listening up, listen up right now. Listen up, tune out, whatever you're doing, listen up. This is important. This side of the altar here, the left side, is called the gospel side. I'm going to be using these terms a lot in the forthcoming weeks, so be comfortable with the terminology, the nomenclature, so that you don't get confused and be like, oh, which side is the gospel side, or what side is the epistle side? What the heck is he talking about? So this is what it means. The left side here is the gospel side, because this is where the gospel is sung, and then the right side of the altar is the epistle side, okay? The gospel side, left side, epistle side, right side, okay? You got that? Left side of gospel side, right side of epistle side. Okay. There's actually a order in which you have to light the candles. I think you start. Oh, I forgot. I was an altar server. I used to know all these technical details. They really get specific with you. You have to start from the gospel side, I think, or no, the epistle side, and work your way out. Start here, do. Then you do this one, do. And then you do the opposite when you're putting out the candles. So you start here and go do, then you go do. So you have to do the opposite order. In any case, the epistle side, it has the prayers for the Gospel of St. John, and it's just there. The altar cards are just there to assist in the memory of the priest. The priest should have these prayers basically down by heart, but they oftentimes don't. And there are a lot of prayers, so I don't blame them. So it has on the epistle side, right here. I'm sorry, the gospel side. Oh, I messed it up. Wow. The gospel side has the Gospel of John, St. John. It's read at the end of Mass. The one in the middle has the prayers of consecration and just has a few other prayers. And then the prayers here on the epistle side have the lavabo and the prayers. I think the prayers immediately preceding and posterior to the lavabo. Lavabo is the prayer when he says, when the priest is basically having the blesses the cruets, so that prayer is there on the altar card, as well as when the priest is washing his hands with the holy water. That's the lavabo. He says, "Clean me." What is it? I forget. It's from Psalms. Psalms 51. I think it's Psalms 51. I want to say. I forget, but it's a beautiful prayer, and when we get to it in the book, I'll explain all its richness and detail. And then so that is basically what we see here on the altar. And then finally, there's a missal book that has a missal stand, and it starts here on the epistle side, and then it'll move to the gospel side, and then it's moved back to the epistle side later on. By the end of Mass, And we'll talk about why that's the case, why that happens. And I think anyone who's been to a Catholic church knows what an epistle is. It's just a book that contains all the propers and the canon of the Mass. The propers, and this is another very important terminology, very important nomenclature here. The propers are the prayers that change from every day to day, depending on what feast day it is. So on the Feast of the Assumption, the propers are going to be very specific to that day. And then the canon of the Mass is the prayers that do not change from Sunday to Sunday, day to day. These very rarely. There's I think if there's a few prayers that may change, but in general, the canon of the Mass almost never changes depending on the day. And it's almost never changed since the very beginning of the church, starting from the apostles. It's highly looked down upon to change the canon of the Mass. Like, it was very scandalous when I think who was it? Was it Pope? I talked about it last time. I forget which Pope, but he tried to add Saint Joseph to the canon of the Mass, and people almost rioted. They almost burned down Rome. There was a Boniface or something, and then as well as Pope Pius, I think it was the 9th, he was asked why not add St. Joseph to the canon of the Mass, and he said, I can't change the canon, I'm only the Pope, noting the importance of the canon. And then later on, Pope John, Saint John, I think now, the 23rd, just changed it, without really a second thought. He changed it and added St. Joseph to the canon, and that is why the missal that you have is the 1962 missal, instead of when was the Council of Trent, 1517 or something like that? Instead of the 1517 missal, it's the 1962 one. Actually, no, it'd probably be 1952, because what's his name changed a little bit of the liturgy too. Pius XII changed the Holy Week. In any case, sorry, that was kind of went off topic there. But that is what goes on the altar necessary to celebrate the Mass. Next week, we'll talk about the ciborium, the patent, the chalice, purificator, all of those things. But for today, I think that is good. I think that'll wrap things up there with all the technical details. So hopefully you learned something new, gain some insight from that. I'll now check the entropy link here to see what you guys have to say, what your guys' thoughts are about tonight's subject matter, or whether or not you have any questions for me. Let me just check that real quickly here. Thank you guys so much for all the casting spells, as well as thank you for the subs. Bean Dip, I really appreciate it, man. You gifted some people a lot of subs. Awesome. Great to see it, man. You did a great job building it, says Orange. Oh, he's talking about my church. Okay. Thank you. So thank you to everyone who donated. I hope I didn't miss anyone. Bean Dip says his card wouldn't go through on entropy. A lot of people seem to be having that issue. I don't know what's going on with that. I just need to give Bean Dip. Bean Dip is a very generous guy. I need to give him my just my personal information. What's his name? King Roip. I wanted to thank King Roip for he donated very generously through Venmo. He donated through Venmo. If you know me, I'm fine giving you my personal Venmo information, so you don't have to go through all the hoops of entropy, or they don't want to give them any money. So but thank you so much for the donation, Vito Carlucci. He says, I had to write a final for my Christian philosophy class, and the topic was the interpretation of the Battle of Jericho. I wrote that a literal interpretation of Joshua 6 would not contradict God's omnibenevolence. What is the church's position on this? Well, yes, it's quite a literal event that happened in history, and I've never heard anyone say it as say it was symbolic. I mean, there's definitely a symbolic meaning to it. Everything, I think, in the Old Testament in some way, shape, or form is figured, it kind of points to some event in the New Testament as some type. This is what you study of typology, as they study different types in the Old Testament and look for how it is fulfilled or come to fruition in the New Testament. I haven't really thought about the Battle of Jericho, but I think it would be kind of obvious that that would probably be the church was able to conquer, perhaps we could say Rome or the West by what would say the wall, like the wall of Jericho. I could see it easily representing in the New Testament, like Roman Empire or something of that sort. And then it was just as the Israelites were able to conquer Jericho through the help of God, the church conquered the West through God's support and benevolence. But in any case, yeah, it's I would not say that a literal interpretation does contradict God's benevolence, because God commanded them to do it, and God is the rule of faith. And more so, it was obviously a war. There's in times of war, there are lots of battles, things like that happen. So people are in conflict with each other. If the Israelites, didn't take over Jericho, the armies of Jericho would probably take over the Israelites, and God knew this, or what have you. So I agree. And yes, the church's interpretation is that God is benevolent in everything he does. So yes, that would be true. Well, this guy, yeah, I don't know if I hope your name isn't like their super chat name, because yeah, I don't want to dox you. In the future, I'll just say Vito, but I have to edit the link here. Is he done with super chats? No, I just read yours, big guy. Thank you. I appreciate the super chat. I guess that's it then for tonight, since Bean Dip's card didn't go through. So let's see. Is there I'll trust Bean Dip if we do the auction. I'll trust him if he wins. We don't know if he'll win. I'll trust him to do it, but yeah, that's tough. That's tough. In any case, thank you for the super chat, Vido. I really appreciate it, man. Very generous of you, big guy. So yeah, that is the super chat for tonight. If you have any other additional questions, you can ask them now, just through the normal link, and hopefully I won't miss them. Tucker asks, is there a particular way that I should set up a home altar? The only reason you need a home altar is if you're receiving viaticum, if you're about to die and a priest needs to bring the Holy Eucharist over. Otherwise, I wouldn't call what I have an altar. You see behind me, maybe a shrine. I would say it's more of a shrine. Just I have just a candle to Mary. I usually have a candle to Jesus and a crucifix in the middle. That's how you would set up a home altar. Yeah, I think we went over this when we went to talk about the last rites. How to receive viaticum. You have to have I think a clean altar cloth, white, 2 candlesticks, and then a crucifix in the middle. I think that's just the basic setup for receiving viaticum. Just for any shrine, you can just have pictures of Mary or Jesus or icons, whatever it may be. I'd encourage it to be blessed so that it has the prayers of the church, that God will use that as the occasion through which he works temporal miracles, perhaps, or temporal blessings, as well as spiritual blessings, and gives you actual graces through such things. So yeah, there's not a rule for how to set up a shrine. That's what you're asking. If you're asking how to set up a home altar, if you want to receive viaticum because you're sick and want to receive the last rites, then yeah, that's the way you do it. 2 candles, a crucifix in the middle, on a table. Let me see if I can pull up a picture. There was a great one in the catechism. I think I showed you guys. But yeah, it's just basically I'm not getting any good ones here. Maybe because I'm adding catacomb. If you look up home altar, most of the stuff I think it comes up. Oh, it is Catholic. I'm surprised. I thought it would be all Buddhist or something like that. Yeah, here's oh, that's for a priest home altar. You don't need that. I don't see any good ones that are oh, here's an altar for viaticum or something. But like I said, crucifix in the middle, 2 candles on either side. It's good rule. With maybe an icon in the background, or a picture of Mary or Jesus or something like that. Or relic. Although very pious traditions are usually used. But Tucker, you're very, and I'm not, I don't want to be like, I'm not trying to be, this is like not a bad thing, but he's very scrupulous. Some of you guys are very scrupulous about these things. You have to remember, it's not about, how you set up your home altar or home shrine, or where you put your icons, or where you put your crucifix. What matters most is your heart. That is what will be judged at the end times, not where you put your crucifix in your room, but where your heart was when you saw that crucifix. So just keep that in mind. I'm sure, I'm very, I wish that these were things I would be obsessed over, but unfortunately I still have to, there's lots of like distractions and sin in my life that I have to like work through before I can get an aneurysm over where I put my crucifix or what have you. So God bless you if that's where you are in your faith journey. All right, so I don't see now I can ask. No, I wasn't trying to dog on you. It's just a good reminder for everyone what's the most important thing. But no, I'm not dogging on you, big guy. Love Tucker. If I could, I'd have to say, if I could remake my generals, because I have a Discord. Let me see if I can plug the Discord link here. I want to make sure I get some you new guys like Vito in the Discord. But if I could like remake the general list, I definitely would. Because right now I got my original. I made the Discord, and then my account got zucked. So now I no longer have access basically to the. I basically am no longer the proprietor according to in the server. So I can't like change who is the generals unless like the Discord gets deleted and then we have to make a new one. Then I can remake it. But yeah, I definitely remake the general list, because some of my generals are just not very active anymore. And I would probably remake it to I'd probably keep Oswald. Oswald is still pretty active. Keep Oswald as a general. But I'd make Tucker, Bean Dip, and maybe Nasuno generals as well. But definitely would change it, because current ones are pretty inactive, I have to say. So yeah. Would you recommend saying certain prayers in Latin as well? Absolutely. It does scare away demons and unites you to the universal church. That said, do not pray unless you know the words you're saying. So, if you're going to pray in Latin, I think that's great. I think it's very holy. Sometimes I'll pray the rosary in Latin. Sometimes I'll pray the Angelus in Latin, depending on my mood. If I think that I'm like under particularly temptation, I might pray it in Latin. But that is because I kind of know already the prayer in English. So in a way I know the translation. So don't just like pray in Latin to sound cool and self-righteous, because I know in my days as a trad cat, back a long time ago, a few years, I was like in this trad cat community where everyone would brag about how they prayed the rosary all in Latin, and they knew Latin like it was the back of their hand, and it just felt very ingenuine, disingenuous is the word I'm looking for. Felt very disingenuous, and perhaps they were very sincere. I'm not going to be judgmental about it. Perhaps they're very sincere. That's the way it kind of came off to me, and I was definitely kind of I accuse myself of falling into that same trap sometimes, doing like just praying Latin for the sake of like kind of just sounding like I'm the coolest, the most devout Catholic in the room. I'm like, oh, I'm praying Latin. They don't. Trying to put myself above others, and I learned now that that's a very self-righteous way of looking. Very, you have the very wrong attitude if that's the way you're coming at things. And so that's why I kind of try to avoid that now. Is I pray in whatever tongue that I can best speak to God, to communicate with God, communicate with His Blessed Mother, ask for intercession. And if I'm worried that, like, my demonic, like temptation or something like that, I might pray in Latin, because it definitely scares them away. I usually pray out loud for that reason, but just pray whatever you might feel comfortable in. But yeah, don't pray for the wrong reasons is what I'm trying to get at there. Hopefully that made sense. But yeah, I definitely accused myself of falling into that trap earlier in my career, earlier in my faith journey. It's easy to get into kind of those bad habits. So let me plug the entropy link, but certainly is not. Don't demote me, says Orange. I don't know, big guy. not as active as you once were. There's the Discord link there, so if you want to join that, if you're not already in the Discord, please do. We give announcements there. We have a lot of fun time. We have a fun time there. We have a great community, so I would definitely recommend joining. Tucker says coming for Orange's role. I think we can all agree Dumb Trick Assy though should not be a general. I think he probably would even agree with that. I don't even know when the last time he's seen a stream or donated, so I watch anime every night, he says. I'm more active than you. I don't know if I buy that. I don't know. I don't know, I don't know. I'm not saying I wouldn't make you a general again, but I need to change things up, spice things up, spice up the ranks a little bit. I have to spice things up. I gotta as times change, I gotta find out who's more active though. It's not just about who is active; it's about who's more active. Who can I think rely on more? Who do I think is more? I don't know. Orange used to be like one of the most like active participants, but now he's still probably equally as active, but other people are more active, and so that's why it's like creates this imbalance. But I love Orange. He's a great guy. Would never speak ill of his reputation or character. Very serious guy. Very serious guy. Takes things very seriously. Don't want to make him upset. Let's see what Tucker asked another question here. But yeah, great guy. Orange he's the conscience of the movement. He always gets on me if I'm being too lax about things, my joking is too vulgar or something. He'll make sure to set me in line. I appreciate that. Does the Latin Mass have any differences depending on which order you attend? There's only one order, and that's the Latin Rite. If by order you mean like the Dominicans versus the Franciscans or the Ambrosian rites, like that is different, yes. I didn't even really into that. That's a great question, actually. But there are other rites that are similar to the Latin Mass that are in Latin that are done by certain like monk groups. I think there's the Ambrosian Rite, Dominican Rite, Franciscan Rite, maybe. Let me look up the different rites. I don't want to like tell you anything wrong here, but I've only been to like one Dominican Rite. And it was interesting. It was an interesting rite. Let's see. Besides the Latin rite, as what else? What else does it have here? Obviously we have all the Eastern rites: Ethiopian, Coptic, Byzantine, Armenian, Chaldean, Maronite, and Syriac. But where's I can't find the list. Where? Ambrosian. Can't even read this. The Galatian. Anyway, basically, Pius V said that any rite over 500 years old that was like local to some order could remain in effect. And so you see a few of those, like Ambrosian. Trying to find like a complete list here. I don't want to tell you inaccurate information. That's why. All right, here we go. So Ambrosian and Moser Arabic. Okay. I thought there was more, but maybe not. Anyway, there's a lot here. There's like 23 rites of the Catholic Church. This is the picture I'm looking at here. Quite a bit of rites. They're all, except for the ordinary form here. The Western Catholic Church says the Roman Rite, which is Latin Mass, and it says the extraordinary form, which is the Latin Mass. And the Anglican use is basically the Anglican Ordinariate. It's just the Latin Mass in English, and that's for churches that are Anglican, which are in communion with Rome. The ordinary form is the Novus Ordo. Obviously not a huge fan. And then you have all these other rites here. The Byzantine rites. You have the Antiochian rites, like the Melkites here. This is if I don't attend a Latin speaking church, I go to the Melkite Mass. I think I assisted at a Dominican rite once as an altar server, but that's about the extent of it. And what's really cool about like the Ambrosian rite though is like the priest T poses. priest will T-pose. He'll be like, it's hard to see because of my camera, but he'll be like, and he'll T-pose. Let me see if I can find you a good picture of it. It's really cool. So we'll see. If you can go to one, definitely check it out. Yeah, here we go. There's like a cool picture of the priest T-posing on all the haters. All the infidels. Imagine being so Chad. You just T-pose at the altar of God on all the infidels. So based. Such Chad energy. Dragon energy right there. Lion energy. Alright, so yes, they do differ in a few ways. Maybe I'll get into that more because I myself don't know all of them. So, awesome. I'm glad you joined, Harkin. Got in for orange. He's the one. Okay, he's like, oh, don't take away my role. So I had to explain why. Why I said these things I said. I'm just saying that there may be poor people who are more deserving, more generous donators, more active participants, but orange is great. It's more, I was more thinking of Dumptricassi, frankly. He hasn't watched a stream in probably a year. What if the church faces west, not east? Is that bad? It just means it's not a traditional church. I mean, yeah, it's too, it's obviously, unless there was some reason it couldn't be made to the west or to the east, and it's obviously a degeneration, but the priest should still face, I think, forward. The altar should still face forward, like ad orientem, even if it isn't technically the east. It should still face that direction, just to instill in the hearts of the faithful this idea that you're uniting yourself with the priest instead of the priest uniting himself with the faithful or something like that. Let me see if I can find. There's a really cool imagery of this, where it's it clearly explains why it's okay. Why is this not zoomed in? So zoomed out. I'm squinting. Okay, this one here. This is I've seen this in many places. This is a clear demonstration why ad orientem makes more sense. We praise you, O Lord. You see the priest looking to the crucifix, looking to Christ, performing the sacrifice, the people uniting himself with the priest. We praise you, O Lord. His back to the crucifix, is back in facing the people. Which makes more sense? I'll let you decide. In any case, yes, I should be facing this way. This is the correct form. In fact, the cardinal, I guess he's no longer the prefect of the Congregation for Sacred Liturgy, Cardinal Sarah, the very based African cardinal, spoken a lot about the degeneration of the West and its loss of Christianity, its apostasy. I think he was considered for Pope at one time. I don't know if he still is. In any case, he advocated for ad orientem and told churches that they should perform it instead. And the Pope basically shut him down and said no. So something to think about. But yes, ad orientem was always the way the church did things. I think at the very beginning of the church, they always faced east, but sometimes they faced the people. But this tendency fell out of favor quickly as they realized that it made much more sense to face towards the wall, I guess you could say, so that way they can put beautiful altar paintings and crucifixes and what have you on there. It's a little harder to do that without it. The Anglican use is not the Latin Mass in English. It's very different, says Bean Dip. I've never been to an Anglican ordinariate, but I know people who have, and that's what they told me. So that's where I've actually I haven't been to an Anglican ordinariate, that means an Anglican church in communion with Rome. I have looked at videos of Anglican, high Anglican churches, and they've seemed similar. So I don't know about very different, but it's certainly similar. They have the prayers before the altar, the asparagus may, but it's all in English. But yes, I'm sure if you asked an Anglican, they'd tell you, no, it's different. But if you have questions, make sure to tag me, otherwise I might miss them. The Croatians were the ones that had mass in their in their vernacular. Actually, I think the Eastern Church did, but or I guess if they didn't have mass, they had sacred liturgy. So perhaps you're right. I don't know. I just know after the Second Vatican Council, the vernacular became the standard. And I think in certain maybe local regions, they began introducing parts of the mass in vernacular, but in general, the mass had to be in Latin according to the Council of Trent said, and I think it was session 22, Canon 7. I think that's what I read off tonight. Orange, no, we appreciate you. It's just we appreciate other people more. That's just kidding. Love Orange. We love Orange. Did anyone want to do a voice call-in tonight? I'm just curious. Otherwise, looks like not too many people have questions, and that's all right. And anything else people want to say? No? Any other questions? Let me check the entropy link. Man, 2 nights in a row without Bean Dip. I missed this guy. But that's all right. I appreciate it, Vito. And we appreciate Bean Dip. Thank you for donating a bunch of subs tonight. I really appreciate it, man. It's very generous of you, dude. Very nice of you. I just miss Bean Dip always had like a quote of a saint or something. I miss that. Alright. Tucker wants to call in. Alright, you want to buy books? Okay. I'll have to transition here to that part. Does an Orange, did he donate tonight? What's the call in? Tucker wants to call in. Wait, no, never mind. Orange is a subscriber. Yeah, all subscribers get a call in. Anyone who donates and all subscribers get a call. No, he doesn't. He says, okay. All right, I think people want to have the auction, so I'm gonna stop the recording now. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube. Follow me here on Trovo, Anime Rightist. I really appreciate you guys' constant support. Let's make it to 600. Let's make it to 600. We made it to 500. That's a great start. Let's make it to 1,000 eventually, hopefully. But let's just keep doing it, guys. Let's if you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe. It takes like 2 seconds. If you have a Gmail account, you can do it right now. I try to upload at least weekly, and I try to upload all of the theology hours that I do. So please check those out. If you missed a theology hour, make sure to watch it because they build on each other. It's very difficult to miss one and then come in because you might miss something important. So they build on each other. So I highly exhort you guys to go back, watch those, check them out. Thank you so much though for you guys' constant support. I love the most meaningful thing in the world, more so than you donating. That it's nice. I appreciate it. It helps me afford nicer cameras and pop filters or what have you. But what's the most meaningful thing in the world is when I check my notifications and I see a comment, and it's not some Protestant spurging out on me telling me that I'm going to hell or I worship Satan, and it's not some just notification for PewDiePie, a new PewDiePie video dropped or something like that, but it's a comment from someone and they say something like, oh, your video really touched my life, I really appreciate it, I was looking for God and you helped me find him, or something like this, because that means I'm doing my job, and that means the world to me, and that gives me such a high. So I really appreciate the fact those comments. I really appreciate them, and I'm glad that to those people who make those comments, I'm glad I was able to touch your life. Thanks be to God. It is not me, of course, who is doing these things. I'm not the one who brought you to me. I'm not the one who's, I try to speak that which God has given to me. These are using the gifts God has given me, the knowledge that God has given me. So thanks be to God. To God be all glory, honor, and praise now and forevermore. Amen. So I really appreciate those comments, though. They mean the world to me. I just want to let you guys know that. So thank you very much.